This picture, the real picture is about this big, and there's my mother on the right, and she's 17 in that picture, and there's this woman on the left, and they're gazing into each other's eyes, and I always think she looks like a 40s sort of heroine in this picture. And when I was growing up, I would ask my mother who that woman was, and she would say, "That's my friend Ala," and then she would usually turn and walk away from me, and that's how I grew up, in silence about everything that happened to my mother before 1946, as if she'd been dropped like an alien into New York in 1946. So I knew this picture. I knew that she was the youngest of 11. I knew that she was from the city of Sosnowiec, Poland. And I knew the name of my grandparents, Hanna and Josef Garnsash, and I'm named after my grandmother, Hanna. But that was about it. And things might have stayed that way, except I didn't have a frozen chicken. But my mother was having heart problems, and one day she came out to see me a few days before she was going to go into the hospital to have triple bypass surgery, and she brought me this box that had a children's game of mine, a spill and spell box. And she said, "Here, I want you to have this," and I figured she was bringing me her jewelry for safekeeping, you know. And I opened up the box, and instead of jewelry, what I found inside was what turned out to be well over 300 letters. Well, I could see that they were addressed to Sala Garnsash, my mother's name, but they were mostly written in languages I couldn't read, and when I asked her what these were, she said, "These are my letters from camp." Well, letters from camp? She'd never told me about her time in camp. And that was the first time she began to tell me at all about her life before 1946. And she recovered from the surgery, and from that time on, it was as if a light switch had gone on, which before was in the off position. No, we can't talk about the past. And now suddenly she became my partner in the detective work of figuring out who wrote these letters, where she was when she received them, how she saved them, and really the whole arc of her story from 1940 till 1945. So on October 28th, 1940, my mother and her sister and her parents, her mother rather, went to the train station in Sosnowiec, Poland, because a letter had come to my mother's home saying that my mother's sister, Reisel, 2 years older than her, needed to report to the train station where she would be taken to a labor camp. She would work for 6 weeks, she would be paid, and my mother volunteered to go in her sister's place. Her parents agreed to it because my mother was outgoing and you know, sort of adventuresome, and her older sister was very timid, very bookish. So they report to the train station on October 28th, 1940, and the reason I can be so sure of the date is because my mother began her writing that very day in a diary that she kept, which were included in those materials that she gave me. So you can see there the date, 2810 in the European style, 1940, and it says in Polish, "From the train station in Sosnowiec." She describes in the diary how her mother was pulling her in one direction and she was pulling off in the other, kind of like a teenager would. "It's time to go, Mom, I have to go." And they had a remarkable encounter at the train station when an older woman stepped up to my grandmother, who was distraught, and said, "I'm going to the same place, I'll take care of her." And like that, my grandmother let my mother go. 6 weeks turned into 5 years. Ala Gärtner became my mother's friend, her protector. She taught her German. And almost immediately, these letters from home began to arrive. Again, these are tiny little postcard size. And you weren't supposed to keep them. The rule was you were supposed to give them back. But my mother made a decision right from the very start that nobody was going to take these letters away from her. You know, resistance comes in many different packages. You know, we think of resistance as being a physical thing sometimes. Well, saving these letters was really my mother's act of resistance. And when she and Ala were separated, Ala began to write to her too. There are about 80 correspondents of the letters. Ala is the most historically important. And that's because she was one of about 12 women who took part in the only armed uprising at Auschwitz in October 1944. Ala was hanged at Auschwitz. This is a panel from Art Spiegelman's Mouse, where he describes how Art Spiegelman's mother saw Ala and the other co-conspirators hanged there. So 1940 to 1943, these letters arrive. 1944, 1945, they're sort of smuggled from one side of the camp into another. And this is the first letter that my aunt, one of the other survivors, wrote to my mother after the war. And for us, for Passover, we have this letter pasted into our Haggadah, because slavery was not a metaphor for us, for my mother, who was imprisoned in what turned out to be 7 different Nazi slave labor camps. So my mother gives me this box, and it's kind of it's the opposite of Pandora's box. So you open Pandora's box, and out of it comes famine and disease and hatred and all the evils of the war. Well, out of my mother's box came this extraordinary collection of letters. And letters have a documentary role in history that few things do. And the letters, which are now in the permanent collection of the New York Public Library, became part of a book that I wrote, Sala's Gift, which is now in 6 different languages, which kind of cracks up my mother. When the book came out in Poland, I called her and said, I'm in Warsaw, and your picture's on a kiosk here. And she says, but I was never in Warsaw. So it's kind of strange for her. I have a unique privilege, which is that my mother is alive. She is 87 years old. My dad is 89. She met him right after liberation, and this is a photograph that was taken last July at the marriage of my older daughter, and these are 4 of my parents' great-grandchildren. So of the 11 children of Hannah and Yosef Garnsosh, 3 survived. Only my mother had children into the next generation. It's wonderful to be with 2 other second-generation survivors to talk about what it means to be your mother's biographer, to tell your mother's story, and to figure out how these stories are going to be told into the next century. Thank you very much.
So I think, yeah, we had all kind of tossed around different questions, but I think the one we thought would be a good one to start is how a childhood with a mother who survived the Holocaust is different than the childhood of any other American. You want to start, Martin?
Yeah, I think it really resonates with me because when I was a kid, I almost felt like I had to take care of my mother rather than she taking care of me. She always used to say in Yiddish, "Mein Körper zieht tumid," my body is always boiling. And so I knew she was very nervous. And here is just a short story where we lived in the back of the candy store. I picked up this box of pretzels. I'm about 4 or 5 years old, and I drop it on my big toe. And it really is excruciating. And I want to cry and I want to yell. But I know I can't do it because it's going to upset my mother, and I don't have the energy to cry and yell and also take care of her. So instead I ask my brother what to do. And he tells me, soak your foot. And so I soaked my foot for a couple of weeks, and it got yellow and purple. And finally, and my mother's wondering, why are you soaking your foot all the time? I said, well, I want to have clean feet. And she was so happy that she had a kid who had great hygiene. And so, but one day I put my sock on, and the nail flips up, and I lose it, and she sees it, and she lost it, just like I thought she would. And so that was growing up. That's typical. Just one other thing, I learned to ride a bike in secret because my mother didn't want me to hurt myself. So I had to borrow somebody else's bike when she wasn't looking. So.
You drop a lot of food in your family.
Right, yes, we do. Yes.
You got soft feet in the Lemelman
right,
family.
Right.
I had the opposite experience because my mother was determined to be a normal American woman. And so she, as far as she was concerned, she drew a curtain across the past, and she wasn't going to discuss it with us, but she was going to do everything she could to make sure that we were normal American kids, whatever that is. And as a result, we were raised to be bold and adventuresome. When my older brother was 6 years old, she put him on the subway to go travel to a school. I'm 6 years old, seriously. But everything she did was with the idea that you're in America, the land of freedom, and you can be whatever you want to be. So we didn't have that sense of a dark shadow over us, unless we asked a question about the past, in which case, you know, the shadow emerged. Probably the darkest I ever saw my mother get was on September 11th, 2001, where her sense of what America was shattered. And to this day, on every commemoration of September 11th, she has this very dark sense that the world she brought us into wasn't quite what it was. Now, of course, from what I told you, you know that my mother was doing an impersonation of a normal American housewife. But she fooled a lot of people for a very long time, including me.
Yeah, I think my mother's, or my experience with my mom, I mean, I'm sort of a generation behind you guys in the sense that, I mean, we're all sort of second generation, but my mother was a child survivor, and she actually more had the experience of the child of a survivor, which meant, and her parents, survivors often fall into two categories, the people who talked about it and the people who didn't. And my grandparents were talkers, which meant that my mother grew up hearing her parents tell those stories, and she wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted no part of it whatsoever, and she came to this country at 9 years old, had no accent, no discernible accent at all, and her friends, she never talked about what happened to her. She never wanted to be a part of her. She named me Erin for no reason at all. She just didn't want to have any connection to it, and so she, you know, for her, it just wasn't a part of her reality, and I think she didn't want it to be part of my reality. But I think that almost kind of, she would sort of tell me the story and sort of blow it off as, oh, it wasn't a big deal, you know. And in fact, friends of hers, my mother unfortunately passed away actually a couple of weeks after I met her one-time brother. And friends of hers came up to me at her funeral after there had been a couple obituaries that had told the story of her childhood. People who had known her for 15, 20 years came up to me and said, I had no idea. And even my father, who was married to my mother for 32 years, told me he read my book and learned things about her he had absolutely no idea had happened, and that she'd kind of kept this whole thing secret. So I think, at least for me, it was this idea of she had created this childhood that was completely normal and had created a whole reality for herself that was completely normal. But to me, it didn't make sense, which is, I think, what drove me to want to learn more and to try to find it, and then also to keep telling the story and to try to, you know, locate my place in the arc of history, as it were.